Yeah, go for it.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
If you don't hear me okay, please raise your hand. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. My name is Prashanth Mahakali. I'm a licensed architect and a developer here in Chicago. Before I start, just so that it looks like we have a good sized group here and we all want to know what everybody does to each other. So let's introduce each other kind of, without names, so that we have some experience levels, around the room. So anybody who's done one deal, real estate deal, please raise your hand. At least one deal.
At least one day.
How about, because most people here have done some. Okay, so we know that there's experience in the room. Anybody who's done more than 10 deals?
Hey.
Perfect. Yeah, one experienced person here. So the reason I ask that is I want to make sure I tailor what I say to all of you or most of you so that you can gain some value when you leave this place. I really, really appreciate you taking time out of whatever you were doing or not doing to come to this. I really appreciate it. So with this presentation, I wanted to touch on a few topics that I'm sure all of you heard about and continue to hear about, but there might be a few interesting things that I can add that kind of add to your knowledge. I'm going to talk about ADUs. If you don't know what that is, it's the accessory dwelling units, which recently the city of Chicago started allowing in 5 pilot areas around Chicago. You could add a dwelling unit either within the building or on top of the garage. So it just never been done before. So we'll talk about that. We'll specifically talk about new construction versus renovation. Some pros and cons, which have led to, which are kind of different because the next topic is building codes, which have changed. And you want to know what you cannot do, or what flexibility the current building code offers. So with that, let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about ADUs. Who here has not heard about ADUs? Good. So since you've all heard about ADUs, I want to talk about these challenges on getting an ADU. Has anybody done or worked on an ADU project here? No. So the picture on the right, that was my first ADU project that got, that was in the process of getting built. I don't have a better picture. I apologize for that because this is a picture from a project that was on TV, and there was a lot of issues around sharing information. So it involves a very popular designer who's controversial as well. I don't want to name any names. So she was involved, and project turned out to be really nice. And it was a new construction ADU, which made things so much easier, which brings me to the challenges. So let's talk about 2 kinds of ADUs. One is the conversion ADUs, which you can create a new dwelling unit within the building, an existing building, or a coach house ADU, which is you're creating a unit on top of the garage, essentially, right? The ceiling height, and I've got some information there which you can read. I'm happy to share the slides with you later on. But the ceiling heights have to be 7 feet minimum, no matter what you do, or what kind of like the basement ADUs are specifically where the ceiling height would apply. But the biggest challenge here is the code required upgrades. Everybody likes the idea of having an additional unit within the building, but what is that, what are the other things that you have to do that make it a little bit of a challenge? For example, you have to bring the water and sewer back to the property if you're doing a coach house ADU, right? Now, if you've known anything about Chicago lots and construction, that is almost near impossible, because now you have to deal with broken sidewalks between buildings, or you're going through a basement all the way to the back, water service upgrades, most likely electrical upgrades. And you'll also have to figure out a way of combining your sewer all the way from the back of the property to the front of the property. So right there, a lot of people who are thinking about doing a coach house ADU would rethink, because what I just talked about, just by itself, even before you start building anything, will cost you between $30,000 to $40,000 right there. So something to consider before you embark on that coach house ADU project is figuring out how to bring the utilities to the back of the building. Now, if you're doing a basement ADU, it's a little bit easier because you're working within the building. But this is one of the pet peeves, is everybody asks for the minimum ceiling height, and then I say 7 feet. They have 7 foot 1 inch. They're like, oh yeah, this is ready to go. This is, my basement is ready to be converted into a unit. But if you or anybody you know has lived in a unit that only has 7 foot ceiling height, I can tell you they're not very happy people. So I really want to emphasize the quality of the unit as much as a code approved unit. Because if you live in a space that's only has 7 foot ceiling height, it's going to lead to some psychological issues that you may not be very happy with. You're not going to have the happiest tenants there. And you might have a tenant that's cash flowing, which is great, but it's not, quality of space is not as good as the upper floor. So just be a little bit mindful about that, because it's not something that people think about until it's done. And when you're continuous, when you go into the space, you'll know what I'm talking about. The value, I personally prefer the conversion ADUs rather than the coach house ADUs, because the conversion ADUs are more realistic, in my opinion. And the coach house ADUs are probably better off if you're building new construction from front to back, because you can lay out the utilities for a much cheaper cost, because you're going to lay out these utilities anyway. For you to extend it to the garage is not going to cost a lot more. So think about that. And then one of the things that I am personally nervous about coach house ADUs is fire safety. Imagine if you had a fire there. Our fire trucks are not built to turn into alleys and come to the back of your alleys and to put out a fire. And this is something that nobody talks about. I know that when the Chicago building department went through this process, they consulted the fire department, and the fire department okayed a lot of this. But this is a serious consideration. Even if you or a tenant were to live on top of a coach house, you're parking a car there, number one. So you're parking something that has a fuel that could burn right underneath this unit. And then you're making it kind of inaccessible for the fire department to reach there on time without fire. So think about that, and definitely, make sure that you spend money. One way to avoid that is doing a concrete masonry structure. That way, you're not putting a frame building so close to lot line. And then you also have the electrical lines going really close to the building, because the alleys have all the electrical lines, and then they have garbage trucks, and then they have, they're not very well lit. So you have a lot of issues that are not talked about. So definitely worth considering all those things before you embark on the ADU process. My recommendation is, if you think that you have a property location that is ADU eligible, go to chicago.gov/ADU and get yourself approved. The address will be approved right away. That is the first step you need to take before you start the ADU project, or call an architect, or right away just go to that website and get yourself, or get the property approved or establish an ADU. So that's what I have for ADUs, and I'm sure there'll be more questions, but we will handle your questions about specific ADUs after the presentation, but I just want to make sure I cover everything else. Let's talk about new construction versus renovation. It used to be, even a few years ago, that new construction was not even something you would consider, in specific locations. This building on the left is a 3-story frame building in the south side of Chicago. And if you'd asked me 5 years ago and said, can we do this? I would say, no way, it's not possible. And this is a, I believe, 4-unit building made completely out of frame and drastically reduces the cost of construction for establishing a new multi-unit building. And a lot of these buildings are coming up and you just haven't seen enough of them, but there are a lot of developers who are specifically building these kind of buildings made up completely out of frame. They're just as safe as any masonry building with their fire rated exterior walls. And they slap on front brick base and then it looks like a brick building. But the fact that the building code allows new construction of this all frame nature completely changes the game, because it used to be that a lot of people would not consider new construction because masonry costs were very, very high. And they would stick to renovating existing buildings, and then they would take on, tour building stock, and to redo the structure and run into all kinds of problems. So my goal here is to tell you, new construction is just as viable financially as in rehab. So you should definitely look into it a little bit more if you've never considered that before. The complexity, in my opinion, of new construction versus renovation, new construction is a lot easier. Everything is very much, you have a clean slate, you don't have to work with existing conditions, and you can basically start from scratch and design everything the proper way, and then you can see it go up, and it is more gratifying, and you have a solid product at the end of the process. Renovation, unless it's a cosmetic renovation, I would say you want to have some level of experience, either yourself or the contractors that you're working with, to have a successful renovation project. And there's also the cost factor where you may budget for something, and then once you start opening up the walls, something else comes up, and then the cost, the scope creep, as they call it, comes into play, and you have to allocate more money or more time, fix a renovation. So I would advise you to kind of stay away from complex renovations if you or your contractor do not have experience for it. They're very, very difficult and complex projects. And I'm not talking a single family home could have complex structural issues. And you want to make sure that you know exactly what you're getting into before you purchase the property and think it's a fast fix and flip. It's not. So once again, I encourage you to look at new construction as an option. And in terms of profits, I found that if it's a good renovation project with just cosmetic stuff, your profit margins are really high because you spend little time on it and then you're able to sell it off. But since those kind of projects are not available to a whole lot of people, new construction could offer you similar results, although it takes a longer time, and it would give you some benefit, but I have to caution you that the profits are not as good as a renovation project would be. But the new construction projects themselves are a little bit easier to handle, contrary to what most people think. The problem is the budgets are high, but the complexity is, much less than a renovation project. So as long as you have the right team of people around you in terms of the architect, contractor, lender, etc., and you have the financial wherewithal, I think you should definitely look into new construction projects rather than just renovation projects. I want to talk about the building codes. The building codes have changed in Chicago after a long, long time. Anybody here not aware that the building codes have changed? Okay, so Chicago historically has had its own version of the building code, called Chicago Building Code. Back about 3 or 4 years ago, the commissioner of the Department of Buildings made the bold move to incorporate Chicago or upgrade Chicago's building code closer to international building codes, which is kind of like the national standard. So they started moving towards the international building code, and they actually successfully, appealed the city council, and everything was approved. So now, the current version of the Chicago building code that we have is closer to the international building code that most people in the country use, for their local municipality. So, what are the differences? The biggest difference, in my opinion, as it relates to residential projects, is it allows for those 3-story buildings, which were never possible before. Now, building code allows it. Before this, in Chicago, the most you could build with a frame building is 2 stories, maybe with a stair penthouse. But now you can build 3-story frame buildings on basement. And this is a huge game changer, because you could do a lot more, or you could build a bigger building out of frame and meet the Chicago building code and not be worried about having to use masonry and things like that. It does ask you to use sprinkler systems, but then the sprinkler systems that the code is asking you for are what's called NFPA 13D. They're not the metal pipes that you see here. They're more like the orange PVC pipe, the fire resistant PVC pipe. They're a lot cheaper to install and operate, but it gives you the flexibility to build a bigger footprint closer to the lot lines than ever before without using masonry. So that's something that all of you should know, only because you could be considering a particular project and walking away from it because you might think that, oh, I can't do anything with it. Well, this could be the difference between adding on something to a building out of frame as opposed to masonry, and you could benefit from an additional space. So definitely worth considering, from both a cost perspective and the labor perspective, material and labor perspective. I want to talk about easy permits versus building permits. A lot of people have the same question, which is, when can I get away with not having to get a full-blown building permit, right? The city of Chicago has its own website where you can clearly see which things, when they are part of the scope of work, you don't even need to apply for a permit. So once you get past that, the easy permits are, as you most people would know, easy permits are not really easy, but they're difficult to understand. So the process of getting a permit is easy, but it's difficult to understand when they apply, and how much they would cost, and what the process looks like. So the very simple answer is, for easy permits, if you're moving a wall, it's not an easy permit. If you don't feel like you can do the work yourself, most likely it's not an easy permit. You should be able to literally do this work yourself, like cut a piece of drywall, put it up yourself, paint it, move cabinetry here and there, and then replace a few things in the same place without changing the scope of work or adding anything. As soon as you start adding stuff to an existing space, chances are you're disturbing what code allowed you to do until that point. So you would most likely need a building permit. So I would ask you to assume you need a building permit, then assume that you need only an easy permit. So, and then always call an architect. I feel like, there are a lot of architects who would give you this information without having you to make assumptions and then find out that they're wrong. Let's talk about inspections. Everybody's had a story about their own, city of Chicago's inspections. The inspectors have, the department itself has had a huge change, in my opinion. They've included a lot of new people who are more code conscious, and they laid out the rules like it is. There are no excuses. So do not do anything assuming that the inspector is going to sign off on it, because in the past it has happened. The new inspectors do not mess around. If something is not on the drawing, they will not approve, or you can assume that they will not approve. and make sure that your contractors follow the drawings to the T, because that is what the inspectors are going to look for when they come for inspections. Most of the inspections are ordered online and they take a few weeks, they show up, and they're not very easily accessible, inspectors, by phone. So nobody gives out their names or phone numbers. They just come there, do their thing, sign off on the permit, and then keep walking. No handshakes, no nothing. So I just want to make sure that you understand the entire department of buildings in Chicago has had a huge transformation, right from the building codes to the staffing to the way the drawings are, taken in for, code review and building permits issuance and all of that. So it's all electronic and online. But if you're not familiar with the processes, and if your architect is not willing to get the permit for you, hire an expediter. Because everybody wants to think, oh, well, expedite. You don't need expediter because everything's online, but you may not have the time or the patience to deal with City of Chicago. So there are some good expediters that I really, think that they know what they're doing. There are also some expediters who have no idea what it takes, but they're still, they carry an expediter's license. So definitely qualify an expediter before you hire. Last but not the least, building violations. Everybody's favorite topic, that they want to know more of, but not be in the situation. So in my experience of handling several hundred building violations over the years, I've come up with a list of, tips that I would like to share with you. Number one, do not ignore the building violations. So when I say do not ignore, I don't mean that you just get the violation in the mail and you toss it. Sometimes the ownership of the property, the address is not updated. So you may not even know that one of the properties that you own has a building violation, because you're going to find out after you get served, because they have to serve the owners of the property. So make sure that the mailing addresses of all your buildings, the ownership right from the property tax records to the building department, whatever it may be, it is consistent throughout throughout everywhere, so that you don't have one address for the tax and one address for the LLC and one address for your home address or the mailing address. So make sure that that part is very important, because it's very easy to ignore the building violations. Number two, a lot of people think this is traffic court when you get a building violations. You do not want to, even if you can, want to represent yourself at court for building violations. The reason for that is you will lose two things. You lose the time that you could get, the additional time, and chances are you'll probably pay fines and get into issues that you do not want to, open your mouth in the court of law when it comes to building violations. So my advice to you is get an attorney who is specifically knowledgeable with building violation courts, because it's quite different from a real estate attorney, quite different from any other kind of attorney. These attorneys, they specialize in handling building code violations. You want to make sure that you qualify them as well. Which leads me to the third point. You always want to consult an attorney, whether you want to use them or not. Definitely consult an attorney, because they'll give you their information for free. Just like you would call an architect, even if plans are needed, these professionals will share information with you without any expectation of signing up with them. At least give you enough information to know whether you should or you should not, go with hiring that particular architect or any other architect. And then my strategy is for building violations has always been, unless it's a safety related issue violation, you buy time, because it could be the difference between having your tenant stay there for 3 more months and getting a little bit more rental income before you have to move them out to perform code violation repairs. So you will want to have that strategy up front, but you want to also determine if it's a life safety issue, you want to make sure that you take care of it right away. But if it's non-life safety issues, you want to buy yourself as much time as possible, because this is going to cost you. So when you get the permits, then you still have more time. And one of the things I emphasize is this: when you get a building violation, you automatically go get permits and all, that. But the court gives you some time to do the work. So take advantage of that as well. So the whole idea is don't be in a hurry to get this whole violations cleared, while, legally speaking, you can get a little bit more time to do the work. The two easy things that most people get dinged on are smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. So just verify that that's there in every unit, because those things are like standard things that inspectors throw into their violation. So if you do that, at least it gives the inspectors who are visiting that, okay, the landlord for this building is kind of responsible. So let me see what else they have. And then same thing with the sign. Most people own rental real estate as an investment, but don't have the ownership name on their buildings. And this is for various reasons. They don't want to get calls, whatever. So if you hire a management agency, just put their name and number there. It'll just get you out of like the standard list of violations that most inspectors like to slap on, when they are called to a particular property. I always say this, screen tenants, you already know this, but I would say screen tenants again and again and again, because if you have not done it, don't try to do it for the first time. Leave it to the professionals, like a broker or someone who's an agency that knows how they're going to fill in the tenants and what kind of background checks to run and all that, because one bad tenant could make the difference between you realizing a profit or an extreme loss on a building. And you know why, because they're going to be bad news and they're going to call, and you try to evict them. They just call the Department of Buildings on their way out and it becomes a problem for you. There are certain terminologies that you should know. A non-conforming building is basically, you don't want to throw, most people like to say, I got a building in the illegal unit. Okay, so the units themselves are not illegal until you're caught. So make sure that you understand the difference. You may say, I have a non-conforming building, which means that if under current codes, that building will not be allowed, right? But when you have a building and you knowingly put in a unit in the basement without a permit, that is an illegal unit. And that's very important to know, because if you're considering buying a building and the basement seems like it's brand new and there are no associated permits with it, you should assume that it's going to be an illegal unit, right? But then if the units were there and it looks really old, or there are signs that it was always been there, it's just a non-conforming building. So you don't have to be worried about it until somebody calls. Because when someone calls, then they'll make it illegal. So you just want to know the difference between that. And most people have heard about the nightmares of stop work orders. So stop work orders are when you try to do something that where you've exceeded the scope of the permit, or you have no permits whatsoever, right? And that part really irks the inspectors a lot, and then they throw the bright orange sticker on the building, which nobody likes to see. But it just means that if you do get a stop work order, don't worry about it. When I say don't worry about it, it's not like a big deal in terms of the process. You should take care of it, but in terms of the process, it just means you have to pay additional permit fees and you have to pay some fines, and you need to make sure that your attorney takes care of it, right? So that's basically it. So with this, I shared some information. I don't want to keep talking. My mouth hurts now. I want to open it up and, give you any insights that you may want to have, or questions you may want to have answered, both from an architectural or a development, standpoint. Because one of the things that I've not talked about is, and it was part of the intro, is I'm doing more or as much architecture as real estate development. So, I'm happy to answer the real estate development questions from, I do a lot of new construction, single family homes, but they're all commercial loans. So essentially the number of units don't matter. It's just, I'm in the development space that I can share a lot of information with you. So if you're considering real estate development, or if you have a project related question, feel free to ask. We have a nice small group here, so I'd like to make sure that you walk out with information that benefits you. So feel free to ask away.
Probably I have three, but I'm gonna go. So, first of all, construction, what is the sweet spot for number of units for in Chicago? Like, to have the good return on investment, on your money? Is it a 2 unit, 3 unit, 4 unit? What is the sweet spot so that you can, be comparable to renovations or a big, like a rehab?
So because it's kind of an open-ended question. Oh, sorry. So you asked, what is the sweet spot in terms of number of units to develop for new construction, right? Whether it's a single family, 2 flat or 3 flat. So I would ask you, if I told you, you put $100,000 on construction and gave you a 20% return, would that be good for you?
Yes.
Now, there are things that you can do. You don't have to do any construction. You can still get 20%. So be careful what you wish for, because sometimes the new construction project can turn into a headache. And one thing that most developers or people who are trying to develop real estate don't realize or don't account for the value of your own time. If you're working on a job, like you have a full-time job and you're trying to do development on a part-time basis, what is the value of your time? What is 1 hour worth of your time? And you do not put that into the equation. When you put that into the equation, your returns are like really low. Unless you're doing development full-time, I would say, your returns are going to be very low, all said and done. You're going to be giving up a lot of personal and professional time to be involved in real estate. Having said that, let's say you're doing it full-time. I would say, depends on the area and what is the most popular thing in that particular area. I like to stay near the Roscoe Village area. We do a lot of single-family home developments there because I know there's a market for it. So it depends. So to answer your question, number one, how much capital are you working with? Who's your lender? What kind of team you have? And which location are you targeting? And the whole thing kind of bundles up into one question is, why do you want to develop? So once you figure out the answers for all of this, because it cannot be a one project and done kind of deal. You have to have a 5-year plan and say, I'm going to develop in the next 5 years, 10 buildings or 12 buildings or 20 buildings. And then the first building is the start of anything. So you go really slow and you maybe develop 1 or 2 projects the first year. And then you increase it. As soon as the lenders get more comfortable with you, they're happy to lend you more, or you bring in more partners. So it is a longer process, but to answer your question, I find that the more number of units you can build, either as a rental, this is built to rent, or at condos, or will give you more return on your investment. But then in a really nice area, if you're able to find a good project, a single family home will return you just as much profit than a multi. So it's easy. So hopefully that answers.
Yeah. Mike, you had a question?
Yeah, length of time for permit process for new construction. And I just want to ask you, you're up in that Roscoe Village area. Are you doing tear downs in new builds, or are you buying vacant land, and what are you finding cost on a city lot?
Sure. So the question was, what is the timeline for a new construction permit process? And what kind of opportunities are there where in Roscoe Village or nearby where I'm currently developing? So in terms of permit, so standard, there's something called a self-certification, which most people here have heard of. When you use a self-certification process, the timeline is significantly reduced. But I caution people against self-certification because it just opens the doors for inspectors to do a very, very detailed check during construction. So when the inspectors come in there, they want to know that the drawings were, reviewed by their own colleagues, and they are confident that everything there meets code and all of that. But when they see a self-certification stamp, it causes some issues. So it depends. So I would say for a 2-unit building or a multi-unit building, new construction permits could take anywhere between 60 to 75 days. If you plan for it, if there's no zoning processes that are required. Now, the city has also opened up a situation for the zoning review to get expedited by paying $1,500. If you pay $1,500, the first half of the review, which is the zoning review, can get shortened to 1 week. And you save a lot of time and money, because you, especially when you know that your holding costs are more than $2,000 or $3,000 a month, it makes all the sense in the world to use the expedited zoning review. And that will get you to the front of the line. Once the zoning review is over and you do self-certification, that will take another 2 to 3 weeks. So within a month, you could have a permit as early as a month. But if you don't utilize the expedited review, or if you're doing a standard plan review, I've seen nightmares where single family homes have taken more than 4 months. So it all depends. But in general, I would say allocate yourself at least 60 days for a permit process. In terms of the opportunities that I have, I've dealt with mostly tear downs, only because Roscoe Village and these affluent areas, you do not see vacant lots, and you mostly see tear down opportunities, and we go in with the demolition permits and all and start out the new process. So hopefully that answers your question.
I've got a question online from Angel. It says, what is the price per square foot to build a single family home?
So I would say on an average, $175 a square foot is a good rule of thumb. There is a possibility you can go down less than that, but with the given material price increases, I think they're starting to equalize now to pre-pandemic levels. So I would say $175 a square foot is a good estimate for frame construction, and about $200 to $225 a square foot of masonry. So that's how I would estimate the construction cost.
I've got another question online. Okay, this is actually kind of in line with what I wanted to ask. What is the sequence process wise from land acquisition to first day of construction for commercial? Do we need to involve architect, engineer during due diligence for land acquisition?
Oh, absolutely. So the question is, if you're acquiring any piece of property, whether it's new construction, renovation, always call an architect, because you want to have a relationship with an architect right from the get-go. You want to make sure that he or she is involved in the process, because you do not want to do any kind of errors, in the due diligence process, especially. The way I like to do it is, besides the architectural part, which I've got myself covered, I still like to ask my staff, because they might look at something differently than I have. It's my resources. But I give myself in the contract at least 60 days to close. And in the 60 days, I will apply for the plans, the permits and everything. I'll do my due diligence. I would contact the lender, obviously, and I'll make sure that I buy myself so much time that right after acquisition, within the shortest period of time, I start construction. So 60 days if you can. Most sellers want to close as soon as possible, but I like to make that part of bargaining to delay that 60 days, in which I just get everything, come as close to the permit issuance as possible. And then remember, you cannot apply and get a permit if you're not the owner of the building property. So you want to basically have your architect time it such that you come close to it, but you don't get the permit, right? And the city kind of ensures that by doing what's called a Department of Revenue check. So if you're not the owner of the property, you will not get a permit, number one. If you owe the city any kind of parking tickets, water bills, anything, unless you clear that out, you're not going to get a permit. Not only you, if you're an LLC and your partners have any tickets or unpaid water bills or any money owed to the city, you will not get a permit. Anybody who's a more than 25% owner will come under the Department of Revenue check. So if you know your partners have some heavy Chicago debt, you know how much their percentage of ownership need to be, So, and make sure that the operating agreement and all that stay. So typically they'll get to you, they'll find a way to get to you. So definitely plan or ask or make sure your partners and you have an arrangement to like know each other's, unpaid debts and all that. Because if it's just parking tickets and, fines and things like that, you can clear it off. We've seen as an architect, we've seen a lot of our clients had a building like 15 years ago. The water broke and the fire department came and put out the fire. They had a water bill. They had
Oh my God.
they had open water mains. $16,000.
Oh my God.
So it's more than my architectural fees, it's more than the permit fees, it's everything, more than anything you think of. But without that, you're not getting any permit. So think about that.
So in terms of like acquiring a property that's in place, but you want to rezone it and you want to make sure that the city is not going to screw you once you close on the property, is there any way you can get any of that stuff that they tell you pre-closing in writing? Or how does that work if you're looking for like a re-permitting, rezoning process?
Sure, it's a good question. So essentially, what I like to do is in the contract for purchase, I'd like to add a zoning contingency.
Okay.
And I like to take care of the zoning review while we are under contract. So I know that the zoning department has signed off on, what we want to build. You do not want to close on any property without zoning. That's my standard rule of thumb. I mean, for single families, pretty much it's okay because that's like the least density allowed on any lot. So you're kind of okay. Even with that, I've had a few surprises, but I would say definitely having zoning review completed will kind of save you from that surprise. Sometimes a zoning change would be required. And if you have a zoning change, you want to make sure that the contract will be extended until the zoning changes. Some owners are okay, some sellers are okay with that, some sellers are not okay with that. But you definitely want to make sure you do not buy a building and then do a zoning change.
Okay.
It's just a recipe for disaster.
It's just
You had a question back to us.
Yeah, question, Prashanth. So can I ask you a question for an ADU conversion in Evanston? Because I know the
Fine.
Okay, cool. So, what would be your thought in working with the city for converting a non-conforming basement in a flat to a legal or conforming basement?
So other questions from Usman?
Yeah, and maybe just let me add just one more comment. So I do know that maybe a couple of years ago, they did introduce some new guidelines to make it easier for the owners to do that. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts or experience or, yes.
So the question was what does the process look like to add a legal dwelling unit in the basement of a existing 3-unit building in the city of Evanston, right? So I personally don't have experience with working city of Evanston on that kind of project, but my experience in general has been, as long as there is when you ask for a zoning change or increased density, you're opening up your property and yourself for scrutiny from your neighbors, right? And the neighbors are going to come and want to have a say in whether the city should grant you this particular, unit or not. So as long as you're open to that and you have a solid reason why, or what is the hardship that you're trying to get this 4th unit established.
Sorry,
should be okay.
can you expand on the neighbors scrutinizing you? What kind
So-
of neighbors they have? Can you expand
Sure.
on that?
Sometimes a zoning change application is, the processes might vary from village to village in Chicago. You have to send out a notice, you or your attorney have to send out a notice to a radius of, in Chicago, I think 600 feet, to every property owner stating that I'm the owner of the property, or the attorney will write a letter on your behalf saying that, we're planning to ask for a relief to add an additional unit in this building, and was requiring a zoning change from, let's say, R3 to R4, which would allow the additional 4th unit to be created. right off the bat, there are people who have nothing else to do, they will show up. They will want to have a, again, some are legitimate concerns, some are, I don't think they're legitimate, but at the same time. Legally, they're allowed to do so, so you cannot prevent them from having a say in the matter. Ultimately, it's up to the city council or village council to grant you that. But typically, my standard, thought would be, what is the hardship? Zoning changes, zoning variances are all based on one defining standard that you have a hardship. Example, I have a shorter lot. Most lots are 25 by 125. My lot is 25 by 100. That's an example of hardship. You're stuck with a non-standard lot, so you're asking for relief to skirt being typical zoning codes. Or it would be, I don't have access to an alley and I have to need a front driveway. That is a hardship. So you have to have that, you have to have a narrative built in when you apply for, unless the city themselves are inviting you to add the additional units for, let's say, to create an affordable housing unit there in your building, and you're okay with that. So that's basically my response. I would say you'll have better luck dealing with the city officials there in Evanston directly than in Chicago. Because in Chicago, typically, you want to have a zoning attorney make the contact on your behalf. You don't want to just walk in there yourself. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, that's good. Can you explain the difference between a zoning variance and zoning change?
Yeah, so at least for Chicago, you have different processes to meet zoning code or not meet zoning code. The lowest and the most least complex of it is called a zoning administrative adjustment. That essentially involves, let's say the required front yard setback was 15 feet and you only have 8 feet. You meet 50% of the requirement, but not 100% of the requirement. Or you have a side yard setback requirement of 3 feet and you have like 2 feet, right? It needs more than 50%, but not 100%. And you don't meet two things, like a front yard and a side yard setback. Then those are all situations where you can ask for a administrative adjustment. The defining standard for administrative adjustment is what you're trying to propose. The existing conditions in more than 50% of the homes in the block. So let's say you're asking for a relief with front yard setback 8 feet. They're going to check or ask your architect to submit something that says the entire block on your same side of the building. Most of the homes already have an 8 foot or less than that setback. Then they'll approve that. The next step, let's say you don't meet that. The next step is variation or variance, zoning variance. Zoning variance is where the defining standard is again hardship. You're not able to meet something because there is a hardship involved inherently with your property. And then they will consider that. And for variation, you can go and ask for anything you want. And it's up to, I mean, when you build your case, it's up to the, the city to kind of give you that relief or not. And zoning change is the top of the line, which is you are trying to like change the characteristic of the entire property so that you could build something different than what is allowed. It could be more units, it could be, taller buildings, it could be anything of that sort. Now, in Chicago, gone are the days where they give you a permanent zoning change. You're not going to get a permanent zoning change. Very, very rare. What that means is you're going to the alderman and saying, my property is zone R4 right now, give me a zoning change to R5. Okay, that's called a permanent zoning change. What they do, or the permanent zoning change is called a type 2 zoning change. What they do give you is a type 1 zoning change, which is you need to have plans. They're giving you the zoning change on that particular set of plans, which have been reviewed by the community groups, reviewed by everybody else. And if you deviate from that, the zoning change is void. So that's basically, the different things that you can seek relief for city. It's a little bit more complex, but I think you want to try and avoid the variation in the zoning change if possible. The adjustment, most architects or zoning attorneys can do it fairly quickly because it involves sending letters to only 2 neighbors and the auditor. Versus variation and zoning change, you're sending it to the entire neighborhood. Or almost.
I do have a question online. Just the first part of that last question is, what is the sequence process? What is the sequence process wise from land acquisition to first day of construction for commercial development?
So. As soon as I've identified a piece of land, I like to go sit at that intersection. Like in my car. I just like to spend some time there and watching what's going on around. So that's my first due diligence process. You might be surprised what you'll find. Online versus offline, right? There are things that you will look into that I would say is not available online. Or even if you go there and if you don't walk around the property, you'll not find out. So a good walkthrough would be the first sequence. Identifying potential issues, especially in Chicago, I've seen, and you may have noticed this or not, some of the alleys in, right, you have the standard electrical poles, right? Next to them, sometimes you see this white box. You know, ever noticed it? It's and it has AT&T or Verizon or something written there. It's basically a fiber optic box, right? And these boxes are extremely difficult and expensive. They're possible. They're there. So if your garage door is in the way of creating that and this box is there, you're not gonna move. I mean, moving an electrical post itself is like pretty rare. ComEd is going to give you all kinds of issues, but moving this fiber optic cable box is almost next to impossible. You're going to spend a lot of money unless it's a very, very affluent location. You can walk away from that property, and it does happen to me. So you go through Google Maps, you do the street view, and you see, oh yeah, it's all good. Let's just go through this, but nothing beats. So walk through first. Number 2, I would say, even during a 20-day period, I would extend it. Like give yourself as much time as possible, especially in the commercial realm. And having your lender in place is a very, very good idea. Get a preliminary, conversation going, and then immediately have an architect give you some bit on like base design drawings, not like the full scope, the cheapest possible set of drawings that you can send to a lender and say, hey, I'm trying to do this. How much would you, are you okay with this? Do you think this is possible? That gives you the lender something to work with. And then they're giving you information as to, okay, bring me this, this, that, and then we can start the loan application process. I think once you get the funding prepared, that's like half the burden taken care of. And then you want to submit to the zoning review and make sure that there are no buildability issues, so to speak. And once they are done, you're pretty much ready to close.
So when would you involve the contractor?
So if you do not have a team in place, those preliminary set of drawings that you're asking an architect to come up with, you can show them not only to a lender, but to different people. One of them being contractors was probably the most critical because they're going to the lender's essentially going to ask you for a contractor statement anyway. So you want to have a contractor, with you. Typically, when you do a commercial development of any sort, whether it's a single family home, loan, or multi-unit, it is almost assumed that you have the rest of your team in place, like an architect, general contractor, lender, a real estate broker. All those people are part of the same due diligence team, and you don't approach the lender until you've kind of gone to these people. Yes.
So, back to ADUs, pilot areas here, the conversion. So you're talking a basement. So you laid out a lot of what's involved to do it the right way with upgrading water service, digging down, all of that stuff. So how are you advising your clients in terms of, they've got a property in one of the ADU zones, they're wondering from a return perspective, is it worth it? Because maybe they thought it was gonna cost 40 grand, but it's gonna cost 120. So at what point, like, is it worth it?
So I'm probably like the best architect in Chicago. Who's turned down a lot of ADU potential clients. I've had several tens of conversations with potential people who live in the pilot zones, thinking about doing an ADU, but didn't quite understand what is involved. See, the biggest issue that you have working against you is that building inspectors have not inspected many of these ADUs themselves. They have the ultimate authority for you to like come to the job site and say, well, I don't like this, upgrade it. Even you may have like a set of approved drawings. And you may have done everything to the drawing, but the inspector would not come and like, agree to it. And you have no other option but to follow what the inspector is saying. So that to me, I would not like to be the pioneer in the ADU realm as an owner. I want to have, it's like the Chicago 2 flat. It's everywhere. Then I know like, okay, if I build a Chicago 2 flat next to a 2 flat, I'm not going to fail. So I don't want you to like, especially if budget is a concern. I would be very, very skeptical, if even if a contractor gives you, oh, I'll establish an ADU for $150,000. Well, show me all these guarantees, right? And nobody's going to be able to do that because not many contractors have done ADUs. So they don't even know how to get their equipment to the alley. Imagine shutting down the alley for a day. You're going to get a lot of neighbors riled up very, very fast, right? Because garbage trucks, you have a lot of things happening in the alleys, people with access to garages. So you want to have a very, very, thought through process where budget is not a concern. Then I would ask you to do an ADU. Now, there are certain conditions where an ADU would make sense because you're having a family member there, you need to have it no matter what. I would say, figure out what you need to do and then, you go through the process, but understand that you have to potentially upgrade a lot of infrastructure and it could cost money. Yeah. Yes.
Pushing back to like, let's say someone identifies a plot of land or we should tear down a redevelopment opportunity. And, from what it sounds like, a lot of the costs and a lot of the process happens once you're already under contract.
Yeah.
Is there any sort of rules of thumb or any sort of guidance you can give to get a high level idea of how much things will cost before you make an offer to see whether or not it makes sense?
So, unfortunately, if you're doing it for the first few times, you're going to pay. You're going to pay because most architects or contractors are not going to give you the time for your cost, right? They're going to charge you something to get something like a deliverable. But the more and more you do it, people start noticing that, okay, he's serious about it. I'm going to invest some time so that it will come to me as a return later on. So I would say expect to pay, let's say the project costs are like $100,000 for, sake of conversation. You can expect to spend at least, between 7.5% to 10% upfront, just making sure that things are, going to go the way, you want. Now, there are ways in which I can talk to certain contractors, when I'm trying to do something a little bit different to ensure that, I don't spend as much, but you should expect to at least budget that much money, as part of the due diligence process, if you're very serious about it. But I feel like a lot of things that you can achieve without having to spend that much, but it's going to take you a few projects under your belt before you get to that stage.
So this, like, for instance, I know you gave us like $175,000 per square dollars per square foot, $175 per square foot rule of thumb to build like a single family home. In that situation, does that include architectural fees, plans, permitting?
Yeah, you can generally include all the development total overall costs in that. But I would kind of caution you again, 175 is like a base number, I would say. You want to have more money than you need to spend, and you can choose not to spend. But if you're going at it from 175 only, that's all you have to make that work. The contingencies will kill you basically, right? So you want to have like at least 10 to 15%. If you're a first-time developer, at least 20 to 25% contingencies. That's the money that you've allocated for You don't need to spend it, but you just have to pay it. It's there if if situation turns south. So you want to make sure that you have a huge contingency there. Then you can kind of like reduce it as time goes by. So the reason, I like to do single family homes, and my strategy is I like single family. That is my favorite project type. I'm very passionate about single family homes. I'm good at it. And I've had some success with developing single family homes. It may not work for you, right? It may not be the right project type for you. So you need to identify in terms of development what it is that works for you. It could be related to your circle. If you're networking against, in a circle of a lot of contractors who can take on anything, don't restrict yourself when you develop. You can do pretty much anything you want. It's all about who you know and who's part of your team. And I've seen people, make a killing with rehabs on the south side because they knew exactly what to give and what to do there. And I would not be able to do that. There's no way. I would lose my shirt. That's why, there's certain neighborhoods I don't go because I don't know enough about them. And even if as an architect, I try to find out about them, I'm competing with people who are already established experts in that neighborhood. I'm not going to do that. So know yourself, know your network, and be realistic. That would be my, advice for developers. Yes.
What is this process going to look for new construction?
So when you come to multi-units, you want to give yourself more than the standard dollars per square foot, only because now you're doing 4 of everything. 4 kitchens, 8 bathrooms, big porch, masonry, concrete structure, whatever the case may be. So I would say, when you come to like 4-unit buildings and such, I've seen budgets between 225 and 250 as well. And those are budgets where you have a lot of masonry involved, and you also have a contract. Now, I've seen people who've done for much less than that, but they are also contractors themselves doing development. So be very careful because just because it worked for somebody else doesn't mean that they can replicate it for you. Yes.
So when the city started this ADU pilot, when you do a pilot, you usually have a success criteria. Like, I'm doing a pilot for so many years, and if these things are good, we're gonna continue to expand. So do they have a success criteria, or we are like one fire garage away from scrapping the whole thing?
So I have to say, I'm familiar with a lot of the people, like, if you've not visited this website called ChicagoCityscape.com, it's a website that I and a lot of people in the industry use. And the guy who runs it, Steve Vance, he was one of the lead people in getting the ADU ordinance approved. And I share the same passion with, we need a lot of units in Chicago. It's not about single family homes only and, getting, the rich people to have their homes, and then their affordable housing is like severely fallen down. The city has made a big deal. It's a big deal to have this approval because it was coach houses are illegal in Chicago before this. So I would say from that standpoint, the success is, already there. The mere fact that they are even allowing ADUs, right? Because all the major cities in the country have already allowed ADUs. So in terms of their success rate themselves, I'm a little bit more skeptical. You haven't heard a lot of people say, oh yeah, I've got a new ADU in my backyard, come check it out, right? Because that would have been the case. That was what the expectation was. But I don't think that's, shaped that way, because people are finding out that these ADUs are not easy to build. They're a lot more complicated. So at some point, I'm very, for example, there's a new company called Boxable. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, that's what I was second question.
Yeah, so
that.
yeah, Boxable is like a prefab solution where you come and like drop the whole thing in place. That would, the city starts approving more of those, and they have, and there's a company in Chicago right now that's just putting out these prefab, buildings all over the place, and it's a great sign because City never used to allow that even. So once that becomes a norm, then I see that the success rates will probably go to the roof. Everybody will have that because most people in Chicago, it's a very conservative city, I would say, when it comes to changing things. People like the good old Chicago way. And if you come up with something new, there's a decent level of skepticism before people say, yes, I like this, right? So you want to be careful, but not shut yourself from the option of establishing ADU.
So does that mean like boxables, tiny homes, maybe
Yeah.
3D printed homes?
Yeah.
You think they're gonna make it new?
So they've already made it to some level, right? So there's a company called Kinex, I think, KINEXS, construction. They're doing a lot of prefabricated homes, dropping it in place after the foundation is done, which is a huge deal, right? Because typically most people don't do in the in the affordable sector, most people don't do new construction because it's very expensive for them to justify it. But if you're doing it in all the factory and the entire home is costing you 250 to build, it's like a no-brainer, right?
Mhm.
So it is going to happen eventually. But you also want to ask yourself, if I have a contract to build a home for you, then I have a prefab home. Which one will you select?
That's not
So
big.
that is a $1 million question right there, because it is all the perception, right? You think, oh yeah, I like contractors, like nail by nail, they build something really nice and I can rely on them versus, oh, it's something that's being shipped from a company. I don't know. But then I can play the reverse role, which is everything is standardized in the company shop floor and it's better than, I don't know which contractors missed which nail in the start. So you can make and that's why the whole shipping container thing didn't take off, because nobody really wants to live in a shipping container. Right? Like nobody really wants that. The idea of it sounds great. I wouldn't even put it in the garage. I wouldn't even park my car, right? So you want to be realistic with what you think. If you think you'll approve it, the chances are most people will do it, but it's going to take some time. You just need to be patient about it. So, anybody else? Yes.
Actually, got a question. I have a question. So concerning the low-train construction, the building code changes. Last summer, I was involved in network construction. Last summer, I was involved in a project just by the Gold Coast. We were building 16-unit, 4-story buildings, all wood frame. Have you seen any interest in more units like that, like more buildings like that?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
No, if you're driven by the new city, by the Apple Store in Austin, there was a 4-story building going up. That's all frame. 4-story ground up construction, all frame. They just put masonry veneer on top of it, but then that structure is frame. And
All through the Clybourne?
yeah,
Yeah, that's probably.
yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, see, so it's Schiller Place apart, right? Yeah, so I've stood in that parking lot across from it several nights and taken pictures. It was something that was very dear to me because, it just makes no sense, using masonry only, especially now because you don't have good masons anymore. You do not have any, most people are not going to bricklaying school, trust me, they're not, unfortunately, there's going to be a severe shortage in, skills trade. So and the city made the right move. So now, and the construction, I've seen it, it's just as strong. So the studs are placed closer together in the lower floors. And then as they go up, they're placed wide apart. That's the idea. So they have more structure on the base. And then as it goes up, they're spread like normal. I think the typical stud is like 16 inches on center. I think if you notice that they had double studs like closer together, right? So, yeah. But it's cheaper, much cheaper. When you do union labor, I mean, they must have spent like 1/4 of what they would have spent if they'd used like, standard construction type. So in that case, it's a no-brainer.
Have you looked into building apartments?
I'm not. Yeah, I've had a lot of success in Chicago, and one of the things I've learned is, a lot of people come and ask me, hey, can you do a 4-unit building? Can you do like a 10-unit building? I'm like, I used to say yes to everything all the time. And off late, me and my partner in the construction company that we have, we started saying no to everything because we are good at single family homes. We want to stay there. And in my architectural practice, we pull about 175 to 200 permits a year, which is much higher than any other architect. There are only a few architects that do that kind of volume. So we can only take on specific kind of projects. So, and we're getting good at that too. A lot of clients, we've had some clients who've not had a great experience with me because I chose to take them on because I felt they could do a good job. We found out that it's not a good match, right? So you want to be always checking out who the local expert is. No matter construction, architect, everything. Like if you come and ask me, I got a great opportunity in Des Plaines, I'd be like, I'm gonna run out of here. Because I've dealt with Des Plaines one time and it is not fun. It's, it takes a local expertise to get the project done. So Indiana, Wisconsin, I've heard great. So land is available there, like a lot of land, less people, because nobody wants to go there. So that's the problem that they're having. No qualified labor. You had a question.
We did. So when it comes to renovating a single family house where you're not having any levels for bedrooms to bedrooms, should you still hire an architect or should you just go straight to the contractor?
So the question is, if you have an interior renovation project of a single family home, should you hire an architect or hire a contractor, right? So I would say call an architect always, because it's a free call. Why not, right? Let them tell you why you should hire them or not. If you come to me, typically I ask you a lot of questions and say why you would not do the project. Like convince me why you're doing the project, and I'll tell you whether I'm useful or not. Because most people I've heard, unfortunately, I'm not talking about anybody specific, they don't know what they want, right? They have an idea, I want to do a master edition, I want to do this, but something is missing. Like you don't know the cost of it. You might not know how long it takes. You might not know, you might not have a contractor. So once I give you the whole picture, which an architect does, you may decide not to do the project. And that there is the value of calling an architect. Now, if you know you're going to do the project, you need an architect for it, that's great. You still want to call the architect because they may find a way for you not to have to go through the building permit process. You might get away with an easy permit process, but typically assume for what you're trying to explain to me, you would need an architect for sure. So I would definitely, again, even though I'm an architect sitting here, my advice to you is always call at least 3 architects. Do not come to anybody just because people know of them and they're good and all that. You want to talk to 3 different people because they give you different perspectives. Like you talk to me, I'll talk a lot about money. You talk to a different architect that talk about design. You talk to another architect that talk about the process. You want to find out what you're looking for from all of them and see and make sure that you get exactly what you need, right? So if you need a design-oriented architect, you don't want to go to someone who's process-oriented architect. Like people come to me because I can do a good amount of design, but I can get the permit process done. Right. People don't come to me when there's like, they want to do one wall and they want to do a really elaborate molding, trim and all that, because there's a different kind of architect for interior design. So, but my answer would be definitely follow up.
I think we've got time for one more question, and it's one for online. From online, she says, from Angel, do you mind sharing what your architectural fee is to design a single family home? It's like a very broad.
So it varies. And development includes a lot. So I'll try to run down the typical steps and then I'll put a fee to it. So number one, you have to have design. So single family home because you're designing from scratch. So if you use one of my other designs that you've seen and it reduces my design time, that plays a factor. You want a fully custom home, that plays a factor.
Hmm.
And the level of detail, if you want me to detail every single element in the house, that's gonna cost more versus I just need a permit so my contractor can get started.
Mhm.
That'll be the lower end. And then once you get started, I have to hire a structural engineer just to make sure that while you're constructing the building, the shoring on both sides to protect your neighbors' homes. They give a certificate for that and they make drawings for that to know how to shore and brace surrounding properties. But there's a structural engineer's fee for that. Then there's a structural engineer that does verify the, the overall structural capability of the building, the design, any structural elements. If the home is pretty standard, chances are the architect can pretty much figure it out. If there are any custom elements to it, like something is a candidate bring out, you need a structural engineer. So overall, I think, and then getting the permit is another permit expediting, are they including that or excluding that? So all of this, if you were to come to me and say, I need this, I've seen your home, one of your homes, I need a single family home, I'd probably charge you about $12,000 to $15,000. And say, but again, don't hold me to it. Don't expect anybody to come to me and say, hey, you said 12 to 15,000. The idea that you just want to go with a rough number, and because most people have not worked with an architect before, and they don't know anything about how much the charge is and all that. The higher end architects charge a percentage of construction, which would be about between 5 to 8% of construction, which is God bless them, but I can't charge that. So my fees are like a little bit more, people come to me because they've had a contractor that has worked with me before, or another client that worked with me before, or they've seen a home that I've done. So make sure that there is some kind of like, why are you calling this architect? My name will show up on Google search, right? But that's not the only reason why you work. You want to read your reviews, you want to do some due diligence before you call it.
Great.
All right, I hope.
I think we can keep you here all day, but
Yeah, I hope you're all, thank you for staying. I really appreciate you taking time to stay here and listen to me. I hope I provided some value to it, and please feel free to reach out to me, and thank you for, the Windy City REI network, a capable team for inviting me and allowing me to share some information.
that's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Oh, man.
All right, guys, give it up for Prashanth. As always, thank you all for coming each month. Give it up again for Ben, I'm not sure where Ben is, but give it up for Ben for helping host us every single month. Good to be back. And yeah, we're gonna go ahead and continue on with our networking. So feel free to keep your ears full, and yeah, we'll see you all next month.
Great. I will stop recording.